All right, so in this video, I want to walk through a handful of examples and illustrations of how what we generally think of as spirituality is actually not spiritual, really not at all, according to traditional definitions and a different type of understanding. And the most important thing we have to understand from the very start is that this isn't a moralistic conversation. This isn't something you should or shouldn't believe or ought to be. It has nothing to do with your self-worth or your value. It's something much more practical and pragmatic, which is, depending on what we want to do, a different type of vehicle may be required, or a different type of body. Like if we want to be a marathon runner, that's a very specific type of mindset and conditioning that we need, and that will produce certain results. But if we're running marathons, the odds of us succeeding in a Mr. Olympia competition aren't very good, because they're a completely different type of bodies and mindsets and entirely different worldviews. So if we're saying one is better than the other, that's not really that practical or useful. It's more so, well, what do we want to do? What do we want to accomplish? And what is the most efficient way to get to that end? And what is perhaps the experience of a tradition or a culture or a system that's been repeating that process for thousands of years? What's their view? That might be a better way of looking at it. So that's a good segue into starting to understand what I'm going to do, which is contrast sort of the modern viewpoint and approach versus something we might call more traditional, more authentic even. So the first and the biggest thing is that within modern times, personal experience, personal point of view is excessively and inherently overemphasized. And we have to understand that there's not necessarily anything wrong with that. It's actually quite useful if we're going to live in the world and have a personality and be a person. We obviously need that. However, we have to understand that our experience and our view are all products. The majority of what we think and feel and react and think we believe on our own are actually just products of someone else's decisions, someone else's conditioning, things that we inherited. Which, if we're interested in something spiritual, which I'll define what that means, or something else, then we're going to need something else. Because from the perspective of these other traditions, actually this sense of self and this personal experience and this personal view is the obstacle, or is an obstacle, and is actually the root of our disease. Meaning this acquired nature, this acquired self, this thing that so many people live for and are addicted to, I mean, we all are, to varying degrees, is actually irrelevant. And basically what is relevant within this view is skill, or developing skill or gong, or the correct qualities based on what practice we're doing and where we are in that process. And then actually what's more important than our personal experience and our personal view is the view of the tradition. And it's a very practical, simple thing, meaning it ends up where they're like, can you do this? Can you do that? Do you have this ability? Do you have this skill? You don't? Okay, then go get it. Because if you don't, then you can't really move or progress or really do anything within that framework. Whereas the personal view is like, well, or the more moderate view is like, well, whatever your personal subjective experience is okay, because it's your perspective and you're a Buddha and you're an infinite being and we're all aspects of God and aspects of infinite consciousness. So whatever your experience is or whatever your view is or however you adapt the truth to you, that's just your truth and that's your right, blah, 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 blah. That is basically just this type of process where whatever we're doing is just inherently just reinforcing and rearranging whatever that is, which whatever that is what that is, and then whatever this is what this is. But as we can see, they're actually different things. So we just have to kind of be honest with what we're doing and be realistic about what that can actually be, because basically this is the predominant thing we've inherited from our culture, from our worldview, and just being humans in general. Another aspect of this is people having this obsession with spirituality being like, being more you, finding your true self, finding your true purpose, following your bliss. But it's like, why does everyone's bliss and everyone's authentic self end up just being how to teach other people to find their authentic self too? It's like, oh, well, that was really lost, but then I realized my true destiny was to be a life coach. So now I'm helping everyone else find themselves, but then they find themselves, but then they just become life coaches or health coaches or healers, and then they help other people do the same, and it becomes kind of very incestuous and inherent and so predictable, where it's like, is that really you? Is that really following your bliss, or is it just this recycled to where you had a really negative view of yourself, so you thought, oh, well, forget that, I'm just going to take that negative view and make it better. So I'm going to make it spiritual. I'm going to make it about other people. I'm going to lie to myself and other people and say I'm a healer and I'm just in sacred service and all this other things, when inherently it's just the same pre-existing dishonesty, just recycled or put on a new outfit. Which leads to another thing, which is the obsession with phenomena or sensation. Like whatever you feel or whatever comes up for you is good and it's okay, and you should embrace that, you should love it, you should go into it, you should journal about it or paint about it or vision about it or whatever. When the view over here is like, well, that's actually not that relevant. It's actually the root of your disease, and it's actually just creating more obstacles for yourself. So, and the question comes back to, can you do this? Can you do that? No? Okay, well then you haven't achieved or really done anything, okay? Next major thing is obsession with thinking relaxation, health, or some aspect of psychotherapy is like the goal or the purpose or the aim or something, which obviously these are great things for sure. But what relaxation is relaxation. What feeling a bit better in your body is feeling a bit better in your body. What psychotherapy is psychotherapy. It is not anything to do with this in really any way, shape, or form. What it is just maybe making your personal experience a little more comfortable, which is great, but making your personal experience more comfortable is literally just making your personal experience more comfortable. Which is why the modern view and approach is insanely vague, circular, and relative. People get really turned off by, and actually in my experience, people can't even understand clarity. They can't even relate to it. They get offended by it. They get turned off by it. They want to run away from it because they're like, well, everything is just relative, right? And none of us have the capacity to know the truth. We're all just simultaneously Buddhas, but we're also simultaneously not. So none of us really know. So it's like, how much more pathetic and disempowered could you possibly get? Whereas the view of these traditions is basically pretty black and white, pretty crystal clear, pretty absolute, not really open to interpretation, not really concerned with what you think about it or what you think it means or how you want to apply it and turn it into the Tao of business or the Tao of motorcycle maintenance, or the Tao of painting. It's really not the point. It was never their concern. Sure, health and relaxation and becoming a better person and these things were part of it, but they were side effects. Meaning, can you do A? If you can do A, then all this other shit will probably happen. If you can do B, then yeah, this other stuff will happen as a side effect. But what people do is they confuse the side effect for the method. Like a major example is maybe a text says, blah, 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 white light will appear in a blinding flash X amount of times. So people are kind of dim, so they think, oh, well, what this means is we have to just visualize this white light and breathe it into our chakra and move it through our body, blah, 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 and that's what they're talking about. No, what they're saying was, if you're doing a certain practice over a certain period of time, this is what will happen. And this is a marker. It's like that happens, so you know you're here. But if this happens, you know you may be screwed up. this happens, you know you're moving through it. But it's just sort of giving you roadmaps. It's not giving you the method, because the method was probably gotten from a person. But people don't have this view of things or this understanding, because they tend to think this stuff is for the masses, which it never has been, like ever, in any of these traditions. This is sort of just a manifestation of this. Because if we really go back to the roots of what we understand in modern times as spirituality, it's basically people trapped in this. Whether it's yoga or aspects of Chinese stuff, or just the modern pop spirituality that we have in America at least, it's basically people who had no real understanding of any of this, no basis, no training, no foundation. Maybe they took drugs, maybe they had some experience, and then all of a sudden they're talking all this nonsense and everyone thinks, wow, they really got it. But in reality, all they did was had their pre-existing self here and then just wrapped it up in another packaging and sold it to people. And then you stretch that out for 60, 70, 80 years, and then what you're left with is a pretty distorted, nasty thing that doesn't really do a lot. So then people have to fill in the blanks with all this other nonsense. Because if something is actually authentic and real, you don't really need to fill it in. You don't require anything else. Okay, so this aspect of being linear from A to B, as in contrast with everything being vague and circular and relative. Because the thing is, here is very clear. Okay, this is where you're starting, this is what you're doing, these are the skills you're trying to develop. Can you do this? Okay, good, so then we'll move on to the next thing. Can you do this? Yes, we'll move on to the next thing. Very clear, very specific. But then if you talk to people over here, they have no idea. What is the actual historical context for what you're doing? How did it come about? Who were the people that brought it up? What was their worldview? What were their goals? What were their aims? What were their struggles? What were their trials and tribulations? What things did they get right? What things did they get wrong? How did they improve those things? How was it passed down throughout time? For example, not even considering the other huge amount of questions and things to understand moving into something. And then, what are you doing? Why are you doing it? How long are you going to be doing that? And a good example of this is people think meditation is like sitting quietly with your thoughts, gardening, doing art, or sitting down and watching your thoughts pass by like clouds. And if that isn't the quintessential example of vague, circular, relative, and kind of leading nowhere, meaning just this, and then so what are you saying? You're just going to sit there and observe your thoughts, and all of a sudden something's going to happen someday magically? It's like, wait, what's your definition of superstition? Don't walk onto the black ladder. Oh, just sit here and do this thing, or just stretch and breathe, and then that will like kind of do something. No, it needs to be pretty crystal clear, black and white, linear A to B. You're doing this for this, for this, for this, for this, and onwards. And again, this thing of never really being for the masses and having specific methodologies. And then the last couple examples is one thing that people really love in modern times is this nonsense of fusion. They want to do their 5-element yoga or their Tao Yin yoga or Hindu, Buddhist, Taoist meditation, alchemy, shamanic breathing, journeying, nature healing, all in one. And people have the most ridiculous stories and reasons and rationales for doing this, but it ultimately comes back to they don't understand really much of anything, so they're just trying to fill in the blanks with a bunch of nonsense because they're operating purely from this vague level. Which is why if you stretch that out over a lifetime, not a lot really happens other than, oh, I had these sensations, I had these phenomena, I had these visions, I had these understandings of myself, I saw myself in the past life. Basically, to put it in essence, in a short way, all the things that people think are correct and are valuable are actually all the things that traditions illustrate as being incorrect, as being signs that you messed up, as being signs that your methodology and your approach is incorrect, which is kind of funny in a dark way. And then the last kind of mindset, which is grossly incorrect, is this whole, oh, don't achieve anything, man. Just kind of be soft and be like water and be relaxed and be nice. Generally, this idea just takes people that are already flaccid and makes them more flaccid. Now, what I'm meaning is an underlying quality, because you could be ripped and buff as can be, you know, from the gym, and everyone will look at you, oh, you're really strong, but in actuality, you're still really flaccid. And then the opposite, you could look at people who don't look very muscular or physique, but they could actually be pretty potent. It's a different type of quality. But generally what happens is, following this mindset, is people get a pretty predictable gradual decline in their health and vitality, which you can see this. If you think of the stereotypes and the generalizations of these types of people, it's generally like a lot of food restrictions, kind of hypersensitive, kind of a bit weird, doesn't really want to do a lot of normal things in the world. And basically what happens is it just ends up being this laundry list of things they can't do anymore, things they can't eat, because they have all these food allergies and digestive issues and thyroid issues and autoimmune conditions and reproductive conditions and chronic fatigue and adrenal fatigue, and the list goes on and on weight gain, being overweight, because generally all this is producing a specific outcome because that's what it was designed to do. Meaning this predominant modern worldview is not designed, it's not built for success, it's not built for power. It was built and designed to make you weak, to make you subservient, to make you docile, to make you reliant upon external sources of authority and power, government, religions, gurus, all these types of things, capitalism, products, all these things. It's designed for that purpose. Whereas this was designed, engineered, put together for a different purpose. So obviously if we're operating from here, telling ourselves we're doing here, and imagining we're doing this, that's a real clusterfuck. But that's the world we live in. And I'm not trying to put it down or be mean or belittle anyone, because in reality, it's a bit of a complex issue. And for me, I'm just putting out information. It'll resonate maybe with one or two people, and then the rest of the people might think it's ridiculous. Majority of people won't even make it this far in the video, but it's really not my aim. And then basically in the end, what happens is people end up becoming more and more rigid, more and more small, more and more kind of Johnny One Note. And I know quite a few people like this. You can almost predict exactly what they're going to say, exactly what their response is going to be, whether that's on Facebook or in real life or whatever, because you can look at them and see this conglomerate, this amalgam, and then it's only going to produce certain things, because that's sort of how cause and effect works. But contrasted with the view over here is, yeah, achieve, get some shit done, make something happen. Meaning, can you do this? Can you do that? Can you do those two things combined? So achieve things, have power, which would lead to increased health and vitality throughout the course of life, not the opposite. Because people think, a great example of this is people think getting old means you get stiff, you get rigid, your body declines, and your health just starts to tank, which there is obviously a natural decline inherent within life, obviously. But what people imagine that as is incredibly distorted. So what I'm saying is, what people think of as natural aging process is actually just people getting more and more fucked up. Because they're super rigid and they're stuck in this personal nonsense, so their body just gets more and more and more unhealthy over time. Not because that's necessarily natural or it has to be that way, but that's just the program they're running. That's just this cause and effect relationship they've spent their lives cultivating. So then there's specific outcomes that happen from that. So I guess one thing I forgot to define, the last thing to define, is what is actually spiritual. what does spirituality actually mean, and why is basically next to no one even doing it. Because within these traditions, there's a very specific definition for spiritual. And it is basically contacting and working with a very specific frequency of consciousness, I guess. It's kind of a shitty word. Basically, we just say contact and work with Shen. Shen with a big S, which is using kind of a Chinese term. Basically, contacting this, and then everything after this, working with this thing, would be spiritual. Now you've contacted this spirit frequency, because people often translate Shen as spirit, so we'll just go with that for right now. And everything else before that is just not that. Or it's preparation, or it's leading up to it, or it's building the foundation, because you need a solid foundation. If you have a weak foundation, then you can't really do much up here. People generally don't have that view, and then they tend to just say, whatever this is. So that's a really clear way, and it's an easy way to understand why people are not doing spirituality, because they haven't laid the preparatory stages and led up to contacting this very specific frequency, which has very specific, predictable, verifiable experiences that happen in the body, and then things which a teacher or someone with skill can test and verify and see, yes, this happened, no, this didn't happen. It's very clear, it's not vague, it has nothing to do with pretty much anything people think that it has anything to do with. So that's pretty clear, that's pretty specific, and to me, in my opinion, is much more reliable, much more empowering, much more liberating and freeing than all of this nonsense. And I guess that might be offensive to people, because everyone thinks spirituality, like I've asked people, what do you think spirituality is? And people are like, whatever feels good, whatever works for you, whatever you believe. I'm like, well, if that's true, then it can't be true, basically, because then it wouldn't be anything. Then it would just be your imagination. It would just be your pre-existing delusion, or some aspect of your own insecurity that you're trying to rectify through something you imagine to be superior. Like, it's just a whole level of dishonesty that is difficult to really relate to. Like when people are really hypnotized and really ideologically possessed, it becomes very difficult. Because basically the thing is all of this stuff in a functional aspect is taking us away from this. So the things people that are doing, which they think are the thing, are actually the things leading them away from ever having the potential to experience the thing, as from the perspective of, let's say, more traditional systems. So agree, disagree, understand, don't understand. It's really up to you. I just wanted to share this perspective, and hopefully it makes sense. And I will talk to you soon.